Okay, thank you so much, Miriam. And of course, my gratitude to Dr. Lara Monroe and her team for this wonderful conference. I'm going to discuss today a topic that I've written about a bit extensively, but I wish to reorient my attention to a different perspective onto this topic. So much has been written on Victorian spiritualism and the spiritualist medium, who was in general terms female, with some notable exceptions like Daniel D. Home, for example. Since the 1980s, feminist historians like Alex Owen, Janet Oppenheim, more recently Christine Ferguson, Pamela Fadgewell, Richard Oakes, Marlene Trom, Claudie Mazicourt, who regards spiritualism in Canada, Christine Arkinstall, and other critics and historians regarding Spain, which is a topic I'm particularly interested in, this comparative approach between Britain and Spain, have unearthed the relevant role played by women in 19th century spiritualism. Since then, many studies have traced the development of the movement since it started off with the Fox sisters' claim that they could communicate with the dead through rapping noises in 1848 in Highsville, New York. This movement evolved from disembodiment, the connection between the medium and the spirits from the afterlife was first proved to be successful through sound. So from disembodiment to embodiment, with materialization mediums, as happened with the notorious case of Florence Cook, who materialized the spirit Katie King, as you know, her relationship with William Crookes, the famous scientist. So in this paper, I wish to discuss a somewhat neglected area, I think, of studying Victorian spiritualism, the embodied relationship between the medium as performer with the materiality of a space, not only the drawing room and the parlor in the Victorian home, but also the stage. In so doing, I will explore the materiality of the dark room and the interaction of the medium performer as an embodied subjectivity with her object world through the framework of phenomenology. And also aim to doing this in Neo-Victorian fiction, where Victorian spiritualism has been quite a popular trope, not only spiritualism, as you know, mesmerism and the occult. So one has only to remember some examples: Michelle Roberts in The Red Kitchen, A Spirit's Possession, both published in 1990, A Spirit's The Conjugal Angel in Angels and Insects, or most notably, Sarah Waters' Affinity, to name a few. However, today I will focus on a more recent novel, and you have it here on the left-hand side, Lorna Gibbs' A Ghost Story, published in 2015, in which a spiritualist science is undertaken from an altogether different perspective. So the pioneering work carried out by feminist historians I first mentioned, for example, Alex Owen and Abraham, etc., in the 1980s, fueled the imagination of contemporary fiction writers in Neo-Victorian novels, like the ones I mentioned, and also Essie Fox's The Goddess and the Thief, set in the 1850s and 1860s, where female mediums used the trance to channel the voices of the dead in the seance and the close connection between the supernatural and technology. I have argued elsewhere that a framework of sensoriality through the evocation of sound, voice, and noise helps us appreciate the effective negotiation between the Victorian past and today's culture, as well as between human versus non-human interaction, augmented by technological advances then and now. And among those novels stands out Roberts in The Red Kitchen, 1990. And I also now wish to remember what Carmen was saying, Christina saying, the first speaker, sorry, Christina saying about the music, not the music of the spheres, but a kind of a music on embodiment. So I just wish to discuss this further with you later. In Michelle Roberts in The Red Kitchen, the science and the female medium feature prominently as a novel traces evolution of the treatment of historical symptoms in women being assimilated by the discourse of spiritualism in the 1870s and 1880s, associated with female sexual disorder. Not only does Roberts' novel examine the connections between hysteria and spiritualism, but also challenges authoritative scientific discourses. The novel deals with the story of three women from three different historical periods: King Hart, the daughter of the pharaoh, later pharaoh herself in ancient Egypt. Flora Milk, Victorian working class medium based on the historical figure of Florence Cook, the renowned medium in the London of the 1870s who materialized the spirit Katie King, and Hattie, orphan and writer of recipe books in late 20th century Britain. Despite a variety of historical time settings and the wide range of female voices, the text underlines the connection between women whose stories become entangled. The story stages a spiritualist belief, credo, as spiritualist believers and sympathizers contended that the medium voluntarily relinquished control over her body and fell into trance for the communication with the dead to take place. So trance conditions allowed for a wide range of unconventional behavior in seances, including sexual titillation, as we'll see later. Passivity, fragility, etc., were treated as women's strengths and assets in the spiritualist circles as they generated communication with the spirits. In the novel Flora, this fictional counterpart of the historical Florence Cook falls into trances several times, interpreted as historical fits by the medical profession and the nerve specialists, which lead to exhaustion. So, but nevertheless, the trance profoundly challenged central ideas about the formation and definition of female agency following Massicot. Mediums developed strategies to define traditional interpretations of agency and authorship. I'm quoting from Massicot. They implied a reconfiguration of the modalities for speech that allow them to speak and be heard in otherwise restrictive contexts. Robert's novel probes Claudie Massicot's psychoanalytic perspective and accounts of the stabilizing forces of trance speaking. So the novel underpins the connection between women, as in the Red Kitchen. This novel allows its female narrators to generate affect by expressing what is inexpressible, what has been repressed or silenced by the patriarchal discourse, the female voice, through sounds and noise. So they produce meaning and make noise, interrupting the system of the male rational discourse. So this novel capitalizes on the relevance of the voice, relevance of the disembodiment and noise. But I would like to focus now on the dark room, the science, which has attracted the interest of feminist historians, Victorianists, and others involved in the study of Victorian science, technology, and its connections with the occult. There were private performances conducted in the safe environment of the Victorian household in the drawing room or parlor, where normally invited guests sat around the table. But were also public performances were paying events that took place in large halls, and which aroused the suspicion of many spectators who tried to discover the tricks behind the psychic forces or the supernatural occurrences. Despite the vast amount of criticism on Victorian spiritualism, on trances, on the mediumistic powers, or tricks, etc., very little has been written into the science as entertainment, specifically the spectacular and theatrical character of seances, as Simon Natal poses in his Supernatural Entertainments, Victorian Spiritualism and the Rise of Modern Media Culture, published in 2016. In fact, sorry, did I do anything wrong? Okay, but that's, you know, the spirits is in the air. Wow. So sorry, I'm lost it. Okay, sitters in both public and private spiritualist events actively participated and were involved in the performance. In other words, as Natal poses, spiritualist spectatorship was therefore interactive and performative in nature. So in fact, there were blurred boundaries between public and private performances. So as in this slide, the seance as private performance has been considered as, I'm quoting from Natal, an increasingly permeable space that allowed for the introduction of social gathering and play into the private and familiar sphere. So we've got the porosity of boundaries between private and public within this the private sphere. The Victorian parlour, this dynamic space of invisibility intervention. Okay, so I'll try again. So the Victorian parlour is a place of invisibility for women's spirits, and that becomes a place for entertainment that puts semi-public events on a stage with music, objects, actors, actresses, an audience, and its own dramaturgy. So these blurred boundaries between private and public help erase any substantial difference between the spiritual seance taking place at home and the one put on the stage in public performance. So both in public and private performances, for example, music played a crucial role as instruments were used to prove the existence of ghosts. The sessions, the sessions were conducted in semi-darkness in both places to heighten the viewer's senses and to make the tricks more believable. Objects such as the table, chairs, the spirit cabinet, where the medium was usually tied up, were a staple in each seance, both in Britain and in the States. And I'm exploring whether in Spain we had the same, because I think we had more private dark rooms or private performances than public performances. One common element is the dancing table, an extremely relevant prop in the spiritualist seance, both in public and private performances. Critics have pointed out that the relevance of this item of furniture, which was used paradoxically to both prove and debunk the existence of the spirits, is intrinsically connected with the power of the movement, the spiritualist movement, in granting symbolic significance to ordinary objects. Moreover, Simone Natal further argues, as regards private performances, that, and I quote, as a domestic object frequently employed to receive visitors, engage in conversation and play cards, the table associates spiritualism with activities of leisure time, unquote. This renewed focus on objects and in spiritualism, and in Victorianism, and in Neo-Victorianism, so it's in keeping with recent material turn in Victorian studies, which has led to a consideration of Victorian materiality, bodies and things, through the lens of material studies, object-oriented ontology, where the emphasis is on the object having meaning in itself, as well as sensory studies. The Victorian fascination with the body's materiality, as well as the blurring of boundaries between subject and object, have become the subject of critical interest in the last 20 years. This perspective of the body, and I'm quoting according to Catherine Bourne, as an assemblage of matter, embodied perception and lived experience that links the object world and the self, so the body understood as an assemblage, ties in with phenomenological concepts of the body, emphasizing the affective currents between subjects and objects. One relevant work is William Cohen's Embodied Victorian Literature and the Senses, published in 2009, which carried out an in-depth study of many Victorian writers and journalists who challenged the dualist notion of the human based on the dichotomy mind and body through the emphasis on embodied subjectivities and the fluid interaction between inside and outside, bearing similarities to 20th century theoretical tenets about the body, such as Delors and Guattari, and following Maurice Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology of perception, among others. To my mind, the Neo-Victorianism impinges on the Victorian duality, materiality versus materiality, embodiment versus disembodiment, that I was mentioning earlier. In a similar vein, Sarah Meyer, Brenda Ayres, and Daniel Dove's Neo-Victorian Things, reimagining 19th century material cultures in literature and film, 2022, is a very recent collection, and it tackles material things in Neo-Victorianism, since they, and I quote, are key to establishing a visceral, tactile, and or emotional relationship with the Victorian past to encourage the exploration of the experiential, symbolic, and affective potential of Neo-Victorian thingness, unquote. In this sense, one Neo-Victorian novel, I'm behind, okay. One Neo-Victorian novel, The Ghost Story, published in 2015 by Lorna Gibb, offers a different take, a different slant to the story of the spirit celebrity, Katie King. The novel seems to take its cue from the material turn, as it shows a clear rejection of binaries such as human, non-human, alive or dead, subject, object, embodiment, disembodiment. Gibb's text centers upon the spirit. So wonderful, yeah, it works nicely. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm dealing with now a ghost story, which is a novel published in 2015 by Lorna Gibb, and I'm just fascinated with this novel. So because it centers upon the spirit, it's not upon the medium, it's not on the, it doesn't center on the seance or the dark room, it's the spirit, the narrator. So, so the novel seems to take this cue from the material turn, and it centers upon the spirit celebrity, Katie, King, and also John, because she claims that she is John's daughter, and she materializes sometimes as John, father, Katie, daughter. So the enigmatic spirit celebrity in the 1880s, which to me is very enticing, having come across anything like this in Neo-Victorian fiction. It also deals, the novel deals with female spiritualists. We have Florence Cook, Mrs. Guppy, the Davenport brothers, among others, and also focuses on the material conditions of sciences. The narrator, the spirit, is a first-person narrative voice that moves in and out of time and space, but it intervenes in people's lives as today, and takes possession, hopefully not, of the body of several mediums as spiritualist believers in the sciences and theatrical arts, like those of the Davenport brothers. Her first encounter is with a young boy, Robert Dale Owen, later to be the famous philanthropist, whom Katie believes she saved his life when he was very young and sick, and she establishes particular bond. She bonds with him from the very beginning of the novel. Gibb takes readers from London to New York, Russia to the slums of Naples and back again, as she follows Katie from seance to seance, revealing the elaborate theatrical tricks employed by mediums and their sponsors. It is a story which spans a century and a half, ending in 2013, with Katie's impressions of the life that she has not lived, that she has a yearning for connection, bodily connection, and physicality. This novel is made up of 7 computer printouts, which appear on an Italian bookshop's print, apparently without human intervention. We have also spirit writing. We have excerpts from historical sources, those books by Alex Owen. We've got excerpts from those books. We have documents written by an academic, also dead, and the email correspondence between the academic and Lorna Gibb, who also features in the novel. So from the point of view of genre, it's a treasure trove, but I don't have the time to get into that. So Katie's voice is contradictory at times, being in and out of the narration, providing signed comments on the spiritualist acts, debunking what she saw in seances, and only intervening to make her system meaningful and visible and sometimes corporeal. The spirit narrator does not try to overturn the exposures, but relishes in explaining how the audience was tricked, alongside the few occasions when she was actually able to create a physical effect, to impact upon the sitters and the medium. And this is quotation from the novel. I concentrated hard and raised the table, once again, the table, just about the family, amusing myself with the shocked expressions of the youngsters. To amuse myself, I jiggled it a little in the air. As said before, the tables play such an important role in both private and public entertainments, as they become very common in spiritualist doings. So, as argued before, the seance possesses a theoretical nature. The spaces dedicated to spiritualist practices become phenomenal spaces. In other words, they become fertile ground for phenomenological inquiry. Therefore, the private and the public performances depicted in Gibb's novel can be examined through the lens of phenomenology, whereby whereby aspects, and I quote, such as perception and the constitution of meaning, objects and their appearances, subjectivity and otherness, presence and absence, body and the world as it perceived and inhabited, and the emphasis on embodied subjectivity feature prominently. Quote, and this I'm quoting from Stanton Garner, who addresses performance and phenomenology in his body spaces. So all these aspects feature prominently in the novel, in those spiritualist arts, and we can follow Garner, who has studied performance and phenomenology in his 1994 book, Bodied Spaces. The disembodied nature, the spirit engages with human interaction through dissolving body boundaries when possessing those Victorians who really believed in the spirit world. In addition, the reader as a spectator, the spirit as a spectator of the sciences, both a spectator and also protagonist, of course, and a spectatorship in broad terms in Gibbs' novel, all of them represent an embodied I. And following Garner, I quote, the embodied I of theatrical spectatorship is grounded in an embodied I, playing on words I. The spirit Katie King is and is not involved, that's why I said she's both a spectator and protagonist in the theatrical arts, both in proximity in this phenomenal space, but also at a distance, being disembodied and embodied when she possesses the bodies of the medium. Interestingly, Gibb injects a poignancy into Katie's story with her yearning for connection, a bodily connection and physicality, and her constant devotion to Robert Dale Owen. That Katie King nurtures the desire to be tangible, physical, is made clear on several occasions. And you have a quotation from the novel here, which is rather long, but I've just highlighted those ideas as a physical representation. Imagining a physical representation of myself, one that was of a far more appealing kind than that offered by Guppy and her baldy, middle-aged, etc. So I'm not going to read a long quote, just who she is interested in possessing the body of a younger medium, for example, Florence Cook, just assisting, as contrasted to the body of Mrs. Guppy, which is very interestingly from the gender perspective, the body of Mrs. Guppy, who is middle-aged, pot-bellied, and balding. It's very funny. Her voice is also very funny and offers some humorous moments in the novel. Critics like Emmanuel Trump have precisely considered the sexual titillation and connotations of the dark rooms. Harsh attacks on the spiritualist movement, as well as against the authenticity of spirit phenomena, were based on alleged accusations of sexual promiscuity between the medium and the sitters. In fact, this draws on the historical facts, on the history between Florence Cook and William Crookes, who converted to spiritualism and undertook the scientific study of the medium and her materialization spirit, Katie King, published in Researches in the Phenomena of Spiritualism, 1874. In Gibbs' novel, history and fiction intertwine, and in a move beyond postmodern techniques, and I'm very interested as well to contrast Angela Carter's Science of the Circle, Historiography, Metafiction, and this novel published in 2015. So in a move beyond postmodern techniques, I think, the reader has access to archival sources, private writings and letters, thus flattening out the distance between past and present, subject and object. So here the past is not only accessed through historical traces, but is made tangible and conjured up by the disembodied presence of an absence. The spirit Katie King, who takes ownership of her own story in this first-person narration that is entitled A Ghost Story. To conclude, have tackled the embodied relationship between the medium as performer with the space, with the bodily space, not only the drawing room and the parlor in the Victorian home, but also the stage. In so doing, I have explored the materiality of the dark room and the interaction between the medium as an embodied subjectivity with the object world, particularly the table, through the framework of phenomenology. As Neo-Victorianism predicates upon the Victorian duality, materiality versus materiality, embodiment versus disembodiment, Lorna Gibbs' A Ghost Story revises the story of the notorious spirit Katie King, whose disembodied voice shapes the narrative, thus turning into embodied I, disembodied I. All in all, Gibbs' novel stages these Victorian preoccupations and shows how Neo-Victorian fiction addresses these continuities between the Victorian past and a contemporary present in new and unexpected ways. Thank you.
Have 5 extra minutes because I think they gave us much food for thought. So we now open the floor to questions or comments.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I thought that was incredibly interesting and rich. And a theme that I thought kind of connected all of your talks was around kind of structure and collage and bricolage. And I haven't read the Lorna Gibb novel, but I really want to now. And it made me think about, you know, why you think that's appealing for these neo-Victorian cultural creators. Is it kind of just a function of postmodernism? But then I also think about something like Wilkie Collins's novels that also use these kind of quite collage-like ways of creating text. So I wondered if you could just expand on those ideas around kind of this kind of collage-like or bricolage-like creation of culture that you're, I think, drawing on in lots of your examples.
Yeah, I don't know if it's true or not, but for me, it's very relevant in these instances of, polyphonic and intertextual references that come together in this sort of collage, how it's, this basic strategy of reappropriation, revision that entails like making anew. From this reference, you, well, it's basically postmodern aesthetics, as you mentioned, but I would interpret it that way, that where you empty a certain reference in certain cultural scripts, and then you remake them to new ends, but with those echoes. And I think it makes an interesting product and for revision. I think that's my modest contribution. I think she has more.
No, not necessarily. Well done. That's absolutely a wonderful question. Perhaps if you ask me in terms of reader expectations, or why readers, because it's obviously contemporary readers or viewers are attracted to the past in many different guises. And I think one way of imagining reaccessing the past is through collage, is through bricolage, is through pastiche, or even patchwork. So we get the impression that we are closer to the past, which is postmodernism, of course. But even now today, which I think we are beyond postmodernism as such, it's a different type, it's a different treatment of the past we've got now in contemporary culture. It's because we're still attracted to whatever happened in the past, and to think, to have the impression that we can have this access to the past. And so we've got bits and pieces from archival documentation, or the setting is in the either Victorian past, particularly in the Neo-Victorian mode, but it can be, of course, Hilary Mantel's trilogy, the Tudor world. So I think if we go to the reader's interest, it's because the past is still haunting us. It's very much alive and kicking for us, and we want to know more. We'll go back to the past. If you ask me if this is nostalgia or retrogressive, that's a different type of question. Thank you, Beth.
Okay, so thank you, Beth, for your question. So regarding the question of bricolage or collage, in the case of Penny Dreadful, I see it as a Frankenstein's monster type of thing. Like you are, constructing a narrative from many different narratives that still, as Rosario said, haunt us in the present, these canonical novels. And also adding to what Rosario mentioned, the past is haunting us still in the present, but I think the beauty of these texts, of these Neo-Victorian texts, is that they have still current issues and problems, as the play we saw yesterday. So they are like polytemporal, in the sense that we still have like this sexism, patriarchal issues that we need to overcome. So I think that's why this narrative still appeal to us. So thank you.
Maybe a very quick last question. Or if not, we can talk over coffee. Would that be okay? Well, if you would join me in a warm round of applause for our panel. Thank you so much.